This is the Roundhouse Report, coming to you flash update with regards to Israel and the Gaza conflict that is happening. Today is May 6th, Monday, 1:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, United States. So the Roundhouse Report, got a little explosion there in the picture. Headline: Israel steps up airstrikes as Gaza rocket attacks intensify. Real quick from the article, this is written by Joseph Fetterman and Fariz Akram. The Associated Press, I don't like them, they tend to be liberal. Gaza militants fired hundreds of rockets into southern Israel on Sunday, killing at least 4 Israelis and bringing life to a standstill across the region in the bloodiest fighting since the 2014 war. That's the last time that Israel and Hamas is the terrorist, internationally recognized terrorist organization that controls the Gaza Strip. Not to be confused with the West Bank. Whole different thing. Gaza Strip, it borders Egypt, it borders Israel, and it's right on the Mediterranean. Tiny little strip. Hamas controls that. 2014 was the last major war. These Hamas dudes, they fire rockets from like civilian shelters, and then they run away, and then the Israelis, the technology that we have, or the modern militaries have, you have counter battery fire, so the Israelis can target where those rockets are fired from. So they do counter battery fire, and then the civilian shelters get hit. And then Hamas gets the claim of propaganda victory. Hey, look at them killing the civilians. Oh, no. But they actually love it. Hamas loves it. Back to the article. As Israel pounded Gaza with airstrikes, the Palestinian death toll rose to 23, including 2 pregnant women, and 2 babies. That sucks, but it's war. The bloodshed marked the first Israeli fatalities from rocket fire since the 2014 war. No mention as to whether or not they were men or women or pregnant or anything like that. It's the AP. But the Palestinians, 2 pregnant women and 2 babies. But the Israelis, just 4. 4 of them died. AP. The Palestinian militants are threatening to send rockets deeper in Israel, and Israeli reinforcements massing near the Gaza frontier. The fighting showed no signs of slowing down. So the Israelis are starting to, I'm sure they've done a rapid call-up draft. Avishai, if you're up in there and you see this, keep safe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spent most of the day huddled, back to the article, with his security cabinet. Late Sunday, the cabinet instructed the army to, quote, continue its attacks and to stand by, end quote, for further orders. Israel also claimed to have killed a Hamas commander. Assassination? Israel also claimed to have killed a Hamas commander involved in transferring Iranian funds to the group. Iran. So whenever people actually say that Iran is like the problem in the Middle East, this is why. This little tiny strip of land and freaking Iran's there. Iran's instigating this. It's obvious what's happening. If you look at the regional situation, the Syrian civil war, you have the Gaza Strip, you have the West Bank. That's pretty much on lock. Jordan's got that on lock. Jordan's under a massive refugee crisis. Over 3 million Syrians in Jordan, I believe, alone. Not to mention Turkey. So Israel also claimed to have killed a Hamas commander involved in transferring Iranian funds to the group. Israel and Hamas, an Islamic militant group that seeks Israel's destruction. I'm surprised the AP actually put in what the group stands for. Israel and Hamas, an Islamic militant group that seeks Israel's destruction, have fought 3 wars since Hamas violently seized control of Gaza from Western-backed Palestinian forces in 2007. To my understanding, based on what I read way back then, this is 2019, Israeli forces withdrew from the Gaza Strip and they gave it back to the Palestinians, the Arabs. There are no Palestinians. That's a term that was made up. They're just Arabs who lived in a spot that was mandated to be called Palestine by the British Empire. They're just freaking Arabs. They're like the bottom of the barrel Arabs. They suck. And why don't these other Arab countries take them in if they're so concerned? But that's all another video. So Israel's like, here's the Gaza Strip. And they left a bunch of really cool infrastructure for farming and stuff, different types of irrigations and hydroponic plants to grow plants. And the first thing that the Arab Palestinians did is they destroyed it all. As an act of defiance to Israel, they destroyed all of it. There was a water treatment facility that they destroyed. They filled it with feces. That's who we're dealing with. These Hamas guys that we're all supposed to cry over whenever they get shot. And by the way, these little protests that they have every week, or that they've been having for the past year every week, They burn tires on the front line of the protests, where there actually are like peaceful, like kids like protesting and stuff. They make sure that there are kids there and stuff, and women. And then they send the medics up front because they have Google real quick a Palestinian slingshot or a Palestinian sling. They get really good at it, and they practice from a kid on up, kind of like the American version of a BB gun. And they fire these things, and they can hold like a ball bearing, like a ball bearing, like that big. Put it inside of it, and they sling it. It's a freaking bullet. Thing's going 50 miles an hour, hit you in the head, hit you in the chest, wherever. You're gonna probably die, or end up in like a coma or vegetative state. You're gonna be maimed. So whenever the media talks about how the Palestinians were, quote, throwing rocks, end quote, that's what they mean. There was a group of freaking slingers, which were used in ancient armies. And the slingers were firing volleys of these freaking ball-bearing rocks. And the Israelis are like, what the fuck? Because the tires are burning, black smoke is billowing. The Israelis don't know what's happening. All they know is that they're standing on their side of the border, and they're being fired at. And sometimes they are actually being fired at by groups sponsored by Iran. They run to the front line, they unleash, they did on their freaking AK-47s, they don't know how to aim. And then they run back. And then the med workers, the medics, run to the front line to take care of the wounded, and then they get shot in the back. Because the Israelis can't see anything. Everything's shrouded in black smoke. All the Israelis know is they're getting freaking lit up. They're getting hurt. You get hit in the head, you get killed, you die. It's a war. And by the way, Hamas is orchestrating this in a kind of a weird dynamic way, in the sense that these protests that they're orchestrating weekly after Friday prayers are in response to civil unrest against Hamas regarding the blockade that Israel and Egypt have had in place apparently for 12 years against the Gaza Strip. You never hear about the Egyptian side of it, do you? Yeah, the Egyptians have them under blockade too. It's not just Israel. But hey, the Egyptians are Arab too, so got to give them some slack. So, late Sunday, the cabinet instructed the army to continue its attacks and to stand by, end quote, for further orders. Israel also claimed to have killed a Hamas commander involved in transferring Iranian funds to the group. Israel and Hamas. So Israel gives back this piece of land, the Gaza Strip, if you want to Google it, to the Arabs. As a peace gesture, I guess in the early 2000s, mid-2000s. The Arabs, the Palestinians, immediately destroyed all of like the gifts that Israel gave to them in defiance. And then they ran the economy into the ground, and then they immediately began fighting each other, and they split. And one faction, which is a more moderate Western-backed faction, is in the West Bank, and then the insane Hamas people are in the freaking Gaza Strip. They're the ones causing all these problems all the time. 2014 was the last major war. So Israel and Hamas, they fought 3 wars since Hamas violently seized control of Gaza from Western-backed Palestinian forces in 2007. From the article, my understanding was 2006. They have fought numerous smaller battles, most recently 2 rounds in March, where the Hamas-backed militants that aren't technically linked to Hamas says they lob some mortars in Israel, and Israel they do counter battery and they bomb the positions. But these flare-ups, back to the article, while lulls in fighting used to last for months or even years. It's been 5 years since the last major war. These flare-ups have grown increasingly frequent as a desperate Hamas, weakened by a crippling Egyptian-Israeli blockade imposed 12 years ago, seeks to put pressure on Israel to ease the closure. Seeks to put pressure on Israel, but not Egypt. Hamas. The blockade has ravaged Gaza's economy. In a year of Hamas-led protests along the Israeli frontier, the ones I was just talking about, has yielded no tangible benefits, because they're freaking stupid about it, like I just said. But they love it when they get their own people killed, because they say that they govern. They say that they govern, and they are the governing body in that tiny little strip of region, the Gaza Strip, and they suck. They face several days of street protests over the dire conditions. So, the dire conditions in the Gaza Strip here, in March, Hamas faced several days of street protests over the dire conditions in the Gaza Strip. So their own people are turning against them. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh said in a statement late Sunday that the militant group was, quote, not interested in a new war, end quote. They like to blame things off gray zone warfare. It wasn't us, it was this rogue group over here, like a lone wolf type thing. They just fired some stuff. They fired 400 freaking rockets and left, and we have no idea what's going on. That's Hamas, right? And this duty signaled readiness to, quote, return to the state of calm, end quote, if Israel stopped its attacks and, quote, immediately starts implementing understandings about a dignified life, end quote. Now, he has a point there. The blockade needs to be loosened because those people can't even, they haven't even rebuilt from 2014. It's been 5 years. They got the shit bombed out of them. I admit, the Israelis do bomb civilians sometimes for this reason. It's called the Dahaya Doctrine. If you want to Google it, it's quite interesting. It's spelled different ways. Dahaya. Dahya. Dahaya Doctrine. Basically, it's to put pressure on the leaders of whomever Israel's fighting at the time. They used it against Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. They used it against Hamas in the Gaza Strip in 2014. There are people in these areas that have money, run the black market type stuff. Start bombing their freaking condominium high-rise complexes, and they're going to put pressure on Hamas, and they're going to be like, stop this war right now. We give you money. We support you, because that's how they get their money. They're backers, Saudis. Saudis wire money and stuff. Not supposed to, but these are individual mosques and corporations or whatever, having these parent subsidiaries and whatever. They only know war. It seems like the Arabs, because Israel's offered on a number of occasions to give land, as they did here in the Gaza Strip, and you see what's happened. Lots of people have died. Hamas is saying that they're not interested in a war, but they want a dignified life. The blockade does need to be loosened. Like concrete needs to be brought in, food and stuff. Hamas wants it loosened so they can bring in bullets and ammunition and supplies to make bombs and rockets. The population wants to just live a normal life and eat food, you know. Thank you, Hamas. So, back to the article. With little to lose, Hamas appears to be trying to step up pressure on Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, at a time when the Israeli leader is vulnerable on several fronts. Fresh off an election victory. Yeah, that sounds real vulnerable. He just swept through a freaking election victory. Fresh off an election victory, Netanyahu is now engaged in negotiations with his hardline political partners on forming a governing coalition. If fighting drags on, the normally cautious Netanyahu could be weakened in his negotiations as his partners push for a tougher response. Benjamin Netanyahu is known for giving tough responses. He has launched numerous, over 100 plus, 200 plus airstrikes inside of Syria alone against Iranian targets. He has used the Rampage rocket system, which initially was registered as a nuclear strike, a low-yield tactical nuclear strike by Turkey. No, that was a separate occasion. Those were bunker busters. That was another platform that Israel revealed to the world when they bombed a high-value Iranian target inside of Israel. That was picked up as an earthquake by Turkey, and they said a freaking low-yield nuke just got used. Israel, Netanyahu's pretty hard line about it, and he catches flack about it. Now they're talking about how his partners are pushing for a, quote, tougher response. Okay? Later this week, back to the article, Israel marks Memorial Day. Israel was founded officially in 1948. One of the most solemn days of the year, and its festive Independence Day. All right. The arrival of the Muslim holy month of Ramadan, which begins Monday, does not seem to have deterred Hamas. Typically, because of the people and the sentiment on the Arab street, they like to not cause problems during Ramadan. But the group is also taking a big risk if it pushes too hard. During the 50-day war in 2014, Israel killed over 2,200 Palestinians. Over half of them civilians. Dahaya Doctrine. These are people only know violence, these Arabs. Over half of them are civilians, according to UN tallies, the United Nations, which is notoriously anti-Israel. According to UN tallies, over 2,200 killed, over half of them civilians, and it caused widespread damage to homes and infrastructure. Again, Dahaya Doctrine. And another reason, Google Hannibal Doctrine, Israel. That's another interesting one. If you jump up out of one of these tunnels that they dig and grab an Israeli soldier and abduct him or her, bring them back into the Gaza Strip, Israel immediately launches what they call the Hannibal Doctrine, which they deny. It's a massive bombardment using every asset at their disposal right at that moment. Artillery, tanks, mortars, airstrikes, precision-guided missiles, dumb bombs, JDAMs, whatever you got, drones, Reaper drones, whatever you got. And they destroyed the entire area. In one instance alone, when an Israeli soldier was taken hostage, within minutes, the entire area was saturated, and over 250 Palestinian Arabs in the Gaza Strip were killed instantaneously. And I'm sure that Israeli soldier was also blown to bits. Never got his body parts, I don't know. So that was in 2014. Hamas is eager to burnish its back to the article. While Hamas is eager to burnish its credentials as a resistance group, the Gazan public has little stomach for another devastating war. Quote, Hamas is the quote, Hamas is the change seeker, end quote, said retired Brigadier General Asaf Orion, a former head of the Israeli military General Staff Strategic Division. He continues, quote, Hamas needs to make its calculus, balancing its hope for improvement against its fear of escalation, end quote. Stop firing hundreds of rockets in Israel. That'll help you de-escalate. Back to the article. In Washington, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said Israelis have, quote, every right to defend themselves, end quote. Trump is very pro-Israel and moved the embassy to Jerusalem. That was a big deal. Presidents have been promising to do that for decades. He actually did it quickly. The UN Mideast envoy, Nikolai Maladov, it's a freaking Russian name. I wonder who he pledges allegiance to. The UN Mideast envoy, Nikolai Maladov, called for a halt in rocket fire and a, quote, return to the understandings of the past few months before it is too late, end quote. EU, the European Union, EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini also called for a halt to, quote, indiscriminate rocket attacks, end quote, from Gaza and expressed support for Egyptian and UN mediation efforts. The fact that the Associated Press wrote this and is clearly pro-Israel and anti-Hamas is quite amazing, because typically it's the other way around. Previous rounds of fighting, back to the article, previous rounds of fighting have all ended in informal Egyptian-mediated truces in which Israel pledged to ease the blockade while militants promised to halt the rocket fire. Following a familiar pattern, this current round began with sporadic rocket fire amid Palestinian accusations that Israel was not keeping its promises to loosen the blockade. I don't know anything about that, whatever. On Friday, 2 Israeli soldiers were wounded by snipers from Islamic Jihad. Google that. Quote, it's Islamic Jihad. On Friday, 2 Israeli soldiers were wounded by snipers from Islamic Jihad, a smaller Iranian-backed militant group that often cooperates with Hamas, but sometimes acts independently. They do Iran's bidding. Israel responded by killing 2 Palestinian militants, leading to intense rocket barrages and retaliatory Israeli airstrikes beginning Saturday. Like I said, today's Monday, May 6th, 2 p.m. now. And they need to be real careful, Hamas, because they're going to lose power if they continue doing what they're doing, I think. They're going to ultimately lose power. If their population turns against them and they cannot replenish fighters, they're going to lose power. In the 2014 war, there's a infamous incident that happened. A number of top Hamas guys and fighters were trapped inside of a mosque during prayers, and they all put on burqas, like the women, and they surrounded themselves with women also wearing burqas. And that's how they made their escape, is they huddled in the center of a bunch of women wearing burqas, themselves wearing burqas, and they made their escape into the crowds through the Israeli blockade of the mosque. That's how these people fight. These people being the Arab/Palestinians. They suck. If they wanted to, they could actually, if they took time and planned in accordance with Iran, they could actually cause some serious damage. And they don't. They freaking literally sling rocks. The Israelis are hitting these crackers with J-dams as they ride their motorcycles around Gaza City, just a sprawling city. Boom, they're dead. Assassination by the Mossad, Israeli's version of the CIA. So I don't know what's going to happen here. This article saying that Hamas is desperate. I don't know. The fact that it was so pro-Israel is kind of astounding to me. All right, this is Ryan House Report out. Check back. Please subscribe.